struggling to own. Why homeownership feels out of reach for millennials and Gen Z. Introduction. For generations, owning a home was more than just a financial goal. It was a promise, a mark of stability, a sign that you had built a life worth being proud of. A home meant security, family roots, community, and a future. But for millennials and Gen Z, that promise feels like it's slipping further away. Today, millions of young adults scroll through real estate listings, not with excitement, but with disbelief. Houses that once cost a manageable amount now resemble luxury purchases. Down payments that used to take a few years to save now look like decades of sacrifice. And instead of preparing to settle down, many young people are just hoping they can afford rent next month. So what changed? Why did a milestone that once seemed inevitable become something rare and difficult? And what does that mean for the future of stability, adulthood, and the idea of success itself? In this video, we're diving deeper than surface-level explanations. We're looking at the financial reality, the emotional burden, the role of technology, and how the idea of homeownership is evolving. Because this isn't just about buying property. It's about whether younger generations still have access to the opportunities older generations once took for granted. Section 1. The financial reality. We start with the most obvious barrier: money, student loan debt. For many millennials, and now Gen Z, adulthood begins not with financial freedom, but with a bill. A bill that follows them everywhere. A bill that shapes every major decision they make. Student loan debt is more than just a number on a screen. It affects whether someone can afford to move out, whether they can save, whether banks see them as safe to lend to, and how confident they feel about their financial future. Younger generations were told that education is the key to success, but the cost of that education exploded. Meanwhile, wages didn't remotely keep up. So instead of stepping into adult life ready to build wealth, many stepped into life already financially behind. And when you spend years just trying to get back to zero, saving for a house feels incredibly far away. Wages versus reality. Even for those who avoided student debt, the problem doesn't disappear, because the bigger issue is that the cost of living has risen dramatically, while incomes have not. Entry-level jobs used to be a stepping stone toward stability. Now, they often barely cover the basics. Many people work full-time or even multiple jobs and still struggle to save anything meaningful. Younger generations are often told, just work harder, cut back on luxuries, stop buying coffee. But in reality, the gap between earnings and expenses isn't a matter of skipping small pleasures. It's structural, it's systemic, and it leaves many young adults working tirelessly, without feeling like they're getting any closer to major life goals. The renting trap. When buying feels out of reach, renting should at least offer a temporary solution. But instead, it has become another trap. Rent has increased dramatically in many areas, sometimes even faster than house prices. And when so much income goes toward rent, there's little left to save. That leads to a painful cycle. High rent means less savings. Less savings means no down payment. No down payment means more years renting. And while people are stuck renting, real estate prices keep rising, pushing the goalposts even further away. Making things worse, affordable housing supply hasn't grown at the rate of demand. Developers often prioritize luxury apartments and expensive homes because they generate more profit, leaving fewer realistic options for everyday working young adults. For many millennials and Gen Z, it feels like they're doing everything right and still standing still. Section 2. The human impact. But this isn't only about finances. It's about what those finances do to people emotionally and mentally. The emotional toll. Homeownership has always been portrayed as a major milestone, something that marks adulthood, something that proves stability, something you're supposed to eventually achieve. So when that milestone keeps feeling out of reach, it takes a toll. There's frustration. There's burnout. There's a constant sense of uncertainty about the future. Add social media into the mix, and the situation becomes even heavier. Seeing others posting celebrations of new homes, turning keys indoors, or building wealth through real estate can make those who are struggling feel like they're failing, even when the reality is that millions are in the same position. For many, it's not just about a building. It's about identity, confidence, and the feeling of having control over your life. Redefining success. However, something powerful is happening in response. Instead of clinging to a system that no longer fits, younger generations are beginning to redefine what success actually means. If owning a traditional home isn't possible for everyone, does that automatically mean they failed? Many millennials and Gen Z are prioritizing mental health, experiences over possessions, travel and adventure, meaningful work, personal freedom, and lifestyles that prioritize happiness rather than status. Remote work has played a massive role in this shift. With the ability to work from anywhere, many are exploring cheaper areas, different cities, or even different countries. Instead of being locked to one expensive location, they're choosing movement, mobility, and flexibility. Success is no longer tied to a single house in a single neighborhood. For many, it's about having the freedom to shape life in a way that feels fulfilling. Section 3. New paths to ownership. Even though the system is challenging, it isn't hopeless. Innovation and new ideas are slowly reshaping what homeownership can mean. Crowdfunding and co-ownership. One of the most significant changes is the rise of shared investment models. Real estate crowdfunding platforms now allow people to invest in property with smaller amounts of money. Instead of needing tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, young people can contribute gradually and still benefit from real estate appreciation. Co-ownership is also becoming more common. Friends, family members, or even unrelated partners are teaming up to buy property together. They share the cost, the responsibility, and the benefits. Instead of homeownership being a lonely, individual financial burden, it becomes cooperative and strategic. Modern financing. Technology has changed the mortgage process too. What once required endless meetings, signatures, and complicated paperwork is increasingly digitized. Digital mortgage applications reduce friction. Financial tools give clearer insights. Automation helps analyze affordability. And emerging technologies, like blockchain-based property systems, may eventually make buying and transferring property cheaper, faster, and more secure. This doesn't fix everything, but it does open new doors that didn't exist before. Policy and housing initiatives. Beyond personal effort and technology, some governments, cities, and communities are beginning to respond. There are growing discussions and programs focused on helping first-time buyers, offering down payment assistance, investing in affordable housing developments, reforming zoning laws to allow more diverse housing options. These initiatives are far from perfect. Not everyone qualifies. Not every area invests equally. But the fact that change is being acknowledged and discussed is important. It shows recognition that younger generations didn't simply fail to try, they are facing a fundamentally different world. Section 4. How this compares to previous generations. It's also important to address a common narrative. Previous generations did it. Why can't you? Yes, previous generations faced challenges, but many lived in a time when wages aligned more closely with living costs. Homes were significantly cheaper relative to income. Education was more affordable, and financial stability was easier to reach sooner in adulthood. That doesn't mean earlier generations had it easy, but it does mean millennials and Gen Z aren't simply struggling because of bad decisions. They're navigating an economic landscape that is fundamentally different. Understanding that difference matters. It shifts the conversation from blame to reality. Section 5. What the future may look like. So where does all of this lead? What does the future of homeownership actually look like? More renting, but with purpose. In the short term, many millennials and Gen Z will remain renters longer than previous generations. But that doesn't always mean defeat. For many, renting represents freedom to move, the ability to adapt, less long-term financial pressure. Mobility becomes a feature, not a failure. Alternative housing models. We're also likely to see tiny homes, co-living communities, shared ownership arrangements, smaller but smarter living spaces, multi-generational living becoming normalized. Instead of everyone fitting into one narrow lifestyle path, the future might consist of multiple valid ways to live. The role of policy and collective action. Real progress won't happen through individual effort alone. It will require policy reform, fairer housing opportunities, economic shifts, and a cultural recognition that affordable housing is essential if society chooses to adapt. The future doesn't have to mirror the present. Conclusion. For millennials and Gen Z, homeownership is undeniably harder than it was for many previous generations. Rising prices, slow wage growth, overwhelming rent, and lifelong debt have completely reshaped what was once considered a normal life milestone. But while the traditional path to owning a home may feel out of reach for many, that doesn't mean the dream of stability and fulfillment is gone. Younger generations are adapting. They're redefining success. They're finding new ways to build stability, new approaches to ownership, and new visions for what a meaningful life looks like. At the same time, innovation, technology, new financial models, and policy reform offer hope that the future can change. Homeownership may not disappear. It may simply evolve. The story of housing isn't over. For millennials and Gen Z, it's still being written differently, creatively, and in a way that reflects the world they actually live in. And maybe that's not the end of the dream. Maybe it's the beginning of a new one.